thank you very much for being with us and for being so welcoming to this community. We're delighted to be here in Iowa on the eve of course, its very important role with respect to selection of a next candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency of the United States. This is a backdrop for our conversation. We are not here in a partisan capacity. This is not a political event. This is simply meant to be an opportunity to inform both those who will be casting votes in this coming caucus in Iowa and those who hope to get those votes about the present and growing danger from communist China. I'm here not in my capacity as now the executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy. We have helped sponsor rather a project called Committee on the Present Danger China to use the resources of an extraordinary group of people, Joseph Bosco being one of them here as a founding member of that committee, as well as other friends and colleagues who I will be describing and introducing in a moment, Sean Lin and Roger Robinson, to help tell the story about what China is up to and what it will mean for us if we fail to recognize the nature of what it's up to and deal with it effectively. In addition to talking about the problem of China, specifically the problem posed by the Chinese Communist Party that runs China for the purposes of informing the job of the next commander-in-chief, the person who plays that role. We're also going to be talking about a very troubling phenomenon that we think has particular relevance to state legislators and people at the executive level in this state as well, namely the involvement of China in our capital markets and how that is translating into empowering and enabling the Chinese to be the threat that they are becoming day by day. Let me just give you a little bit of background on the Committee on the Present Danger. This is a group that has had several incarnations in the past. It was most importantly, I think, in the mid-1970s, a vehicle for undertaking a similar kind of educational effort to the one that we're talking about today. It was mounted in part in support of the thinking and ideas and ambitions of a fellow by the name of Ronald Reagan, who was one of its founding members. Ronald Reagan and the others on the Committee on the Present Danger, Present Danger, used this run-up to the 1980 election to articulate an alternative strategy to that of engagement, if you will, or détente, as it was called at the time, with the Soviet Union, namely underwriting it and otherwise enabling it to persist. Something that successive American governments, Republican and Democratic and foreign allies of ours, had done a lot of. The Committee on the Present Danger helped articulate an alternative strategy that I think could be described as rolling back the Soviet Union, something that President Reagan, when he was a candidate, ran on in 1980, and ultimately, when he was elected, secured a mandate to execute. And that strategy subsequently informed his presidency. It became the thrust of his efforts vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And as they say, the rest is history. Thanks in part to the work of the Committee on the Present Danger, President Reagan successfully brought down the Soviet empire, freeing hundreds of millions of people. President Reagan warned long before he became president, frankly, but throughout his career, about the existential threats to freedom that every generation faces. His was the Soviet Union, most especially, before that, Nazism and fascism. We have today a new existential threat to freedom in the form of communist China. And what we are here to do today is to describe in some detail the various forms that existential threat takes, the extent to which it must be properly understood and properly responded to. And I have to say, again, without being partisan about it, that the need for this here in Iowa and across the country is all the more obvious because there has been some lack of clarity, frankly, on the part of some of the candidates for the Democratic nomination, notably former Vice President Joe Biden, whose position has shifted from China is not a problem to China is a problem, back to China is not a problem in just the space of the past few months. We want to make sure that his understanding of this formidable foe is articulated so that the American people can understand it, as must be that of every other candidate for the job of commander-in-chief. And every bit as important that we understand what they would do about this existential threat to freedom. So we will have 3 presentations this morning talking about different aspects of the problem. The first will be by Joseph Bosco. Joe is an attorney by training, Harvard trained, including under Henry Kissinger, who was his professor for a time when he was in law school there. He went on to become a very senior official in the U.S. Defense Department, the desk officer whose responsibilities included Communist China. He has been very active on the public policy front for years, both in government, of course, and out, including now writing frequently for the Hill newspaper in Washington. Joe is going to talk about kind of the geostrategic context in which we have to understand what China is up to, as well as some of the most alarming elements of what it is up to. He will be followed by Dr. Sean Lin. Dr. Lin is a Chinese expat who survived the massacre in Tiananmen Square, where he was one of the student protesters. Dr. Lin is these days the executive director of the Global Alliance Against Communist Propaganda and Disinformation. He is a practitioner of Falun Gong, and for that he has been persecuted, as have many of his co-religionists, including detained in China for a time. He also served in the United States Army for 9 years, initially as an enlisted officer, then as a commissioned officer, rising to the rank of captain. Interestingly enough, and I consider this actually quite providential, given some of the things we need to talk about today, his last duty station in the Army was as the laboratory director at the viral disease branch of the Army's Walter Reed Institute of Research. He will be talking about what the Communist Party of China is doing to its own people, both religious followers and others, and how they're doing it, with what technology they're doing it, and the effects on those people. I hope that he will also talk a bit about what is currently being afflicted upon those people, and perhaps speculate with us as to why, in the form of this coronavirus that is now achieving, it seems, at least initial stages of epidemic, if not pandemic, proportions as an affliction on the people of China and quite possibly the rest of us around the world as well. We will have joining us by videotape, thirdly, another distinguished contributor by the name of Roger Robinson. Roger served in the Reagan administration on the National Security Council staff. He was really instrumental in helping President Reagan translate the strategy that I was talking about a moment ago into an operational plan, which was executed with decisive effect in the economic warfare space, specifically against the Soviet Union. Roger has gone on to do several things as the president and founder of RWR Advisory Group, and also as the chairman of the Prague Security Studies Institute, and he will be talking by videotape with us today about specifically how we, in the United States, through our capital markets, are actually underwriting and enabling what China is up to in so many of these threatening ways. We will be then happy to take questions and have a bit of a discussion amongst ourselves about what now must be done in light of all of this. And we very much appreciate those of you who are following our proceedings by live stream or by videotape, and look forward to the feedback that we hope we will have to this vitally important program. The first in a series of similar kinds of threat briefings. The Committee on the Present Danger China will be sponsoring in states where elections will be taking place shortly. We will be in New Hampshire a week from today and South Carolina 2 weeks from tomorrow, in the interest of similarly informing the election debate and state legislators about the problem that their public pension funds are investing in Chinese companies that constitute threats to us, to our allies, to people elsewhere around the world, and of course, to the Chinese people themselves.